We should start. Neto, you also, yeah, good? Okay. Yeah, so do you want to say a few words?
Well, actually no. Okay, just welcome to Gridcross number 19 for art criticism. Before we start the panel, just one thing, the talk tonight will be streamed online, and for those in the audience who don't want to be heard in the live stream, just don't take the microphone, so there is silence also during the talk in the live stream. And now, Klaus Speidel from Verein K, welcome. You will do the talk tonight together with your guest, and yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so welcome everybody. Also, I know a few people will be watching online, so also hello. It's always the imaginary people online. When you only have two people in the room, you're like, but there's certainly a large crowd online. But I think today there's actually a few people online. Yeah, welcome to Gridcross. Some of you I know, most of you I haven't seen here before, so just a few words about the format in which this is taking place. And Gridcross was created when Verein K was created a few years ago with Jelena Kalujerovic, Dejan Kalujerovic, and myself, where we try to facilitate within Gridcross a kind of critical discourse around contemporary writing. At least that was the beginning of what we did, because we felt that, you know, Elkins maybe was right when he wrote that art criticism is massively produced and massively ignored. So we couldn't do anything against the massively producing, but maybe something against the massively ignoring part. And so we decided to read critical text and discuss that together. And over the years, the format, now we're at number 19 of Gridcross, has evolved. We started inviting guests, having specific topics linked to our guests, someone from the American South trying to make things happen there, someone from Russia who now emigrated, more from a philosophical perspective, sometimes really engaging with the writing very deeply in kind of word by word sense, sometimes engaging with the ideas in the writing, but also sometimes hosting Gridcross sessions that are more around the theme of the moment. So we did one during the pandemic, in kind of the early time of the pandemic, discussing, you know, the impact on art and art institutions. And now I would say this Gridcross is again one where we engage with the theme of the moment. And this time I have a semi-spontaneous guest whom I invited, and who, when he came, I asked whether he wanted to be here on stage with me. So I'm sure you're not unprepared, but you know, well, so it's completely spontaneous in any case. So he doesn't know what we're gonna talk about more than you do, because we didn't prepare it beforehand. So I think it's a good disclaimer.
Well, at least I read the text.
Yes, so he read the text, and Axel Stockburger, some of you might know him as well, is also. So I'm also doing a seminar in the Angewandte, and Axel has also been doing a seminar in the academy. No, you haven't. So did I mix up things?
No, it's like Axel is a good friend, but
I
didn't do any seminars at the.
You didn't. But what? How did you come to the topic of AI, or what's your history with AI?
It's like have been dabbling with media art since about 20 years or something like that, and it's also like I teach programming to art students in the UK.
Ah, okay. So I completely get it. Sorry about that. Okay, yeah. So we'll both be here. One from the from the artist perspective more, and me from the critic perspective. And really, the idea is to discuss AI in terms of its writing, and in terms of writing, using AI to write, and also in terms of art. I really have a problem with faces, so I'm really sorry about that. I feel very embarrassed now. I have
Why?
facial memory sometimes. Yeah. Okay. So I also suggested two texts, because we usually have text as well, but the texts are somehow a way to get us started. And I posted on Facebook and on Instagram a few a few excerpts of text I had ChatGPT write, based on the text by Herbert that I put in the readings, because one of the points he's making is that ChatGPT is never critical, and that therefore it can't do art criticism. So I thought, okay, that's a challenge, because a lot of people are now playing around with these tools and are basically trying to see how far they can go. And usually a lot of people from the kind of traditional world, art critics, art writers, philosophers like myself, basically come to the conclusion that it's not good enough. And I think there might be something fundamentally wrong with most of these conclusions. Maybe it's not good enough as seen from the perspective of the quality of what we produce, also in terms of images. But what these texts often tend to forget, in my opinion, is that maybe it doesn't matter that it's not good enough, because everything exists within a context. And the question is, what do people expect from art writing, and from what art writing? So most people who do art writing and criticism will occasionally write a press release and will earn money for writing a press release. Will it always be important that the press release is signed by a kind of famous writer or not? For instance, or maybe in an essay, a kind of sophisticated essay, we will still want to have a voice, hear a voice, but for many texts that we live on, and I think for illustrators it's very similar, maybe it doesn't really matter that there's not an author. So I think a lot of things might break away even if the texts are not yet good enough. And if they're not getting massively better, still a lot of what's written now by people might be replaced by AI. And when Hito Steil recently in an interview with Kate Brown said that basically ChatGPT is like the NFT of the moment, and it's a new hype machine, and it's an onboarding tool for corporations, I think she's wrong, fundamentally wrong, because when NFTs came out, most people didn't have any use for them. Most people didn't need to put a price tag on GIFs or on digitally generated images, which was the major use of NFTs. But when ChatGPT came out, people from probably your father through several friends of mine started using it from day two. One friend needs to review a massive number of master's proposals for a school, and he still reads them himself, but he has the complete write-up be done by ChatGPT now. Another friend sells design online, and in this design sales, he constantly has to describe old design. Now ChatGPT tells the stories much better than he used to do it, and with much less time. And so on and so forth. One friend told me that he has a good friend who started using ChatGPT to have it write her application letters, motivation letters for jobs that she doesn't really like and has to apply to because she needs the money. So ChatGPT now does the part of the job that she hates, which is writing an application letter for something she doesn't really care about. So there's a massive kind of need that this tool fulfills, which of course changes the situation significantly in terms of what this tool does in the world. This doesn't, of course, answer the question if the texts are great, let alone if they are art. But this is a different question. So I think we have to distinguish a bunch of questions, and this is why I'm taking a bit of time to do a kind of intro to just situate the different topics. But one topic is, what will it do in the world? What will these art generation tools do in the world? What will these text generation tools do in the world? Another question is, how relevant are they in the scale of artistic creation, as understood from a sophisticated perspective of someone who knows the history of modern and contemporary art, for instance. And there's a few other questions that are linked to that. Of course, the economic aspect of the tools. So what will it do to jobs that people are now performing, which is yet a kind of another aspect. How about the process of making in terms of these tools versus the process of human making? And that's another, I would say, pitfall of many of the texts I read, and one is quoted in the text by Herbert, where the writer says, well, it doesn't have emotions. And when you ask ChatGPT, it says, yes, I don't have emotions, I don't have perceptions, therefore I'm not as good as a human. But the text sounds like it has emotions. So in the end, does it matter that it doesn't have emotions? And in what context will it matter? Will people still be, this was generated by something in every case, right? In some cases they might be feeling, I still want the thing that was generated by an actual human that doesn't just pretend to have emotions, but it actually has them. But in many cases, people will probably be happy with things that just pretend to have had emotions or that produce outputs that look like something with emotions and perceptions has produced them. And this seems to be already true for therapy somehow, with a lot of therapy chatbots or friend chatbots making a lot of people satisfied and happy, like Replica. There was a big article on that. As a friend, where positively know that this is just a machine generating text, and yet it doesn't matter to your effect. You still like to converse with it, and I must say that I sometimes catch myself when I converse, and that's a big question. Do we want to use these terms? Do we want to use converse? Do we even want to use intelligence when we speak of artificial intelligence, or do we always want to put brackets? Do we want to, so which are the terms of our ordinary life that we still want to apply? And what does it mean when we apply them? Hito Steil in this interview suggests to speak of statistical renderings rather than images. She says DALL-E, one of these tools that makes images, produces, and maybe you probably have seen a few of them. If you're here, I myself have been playing around with Midjourney also to prepare this session, trying to make Midjourney generate images that have something to do with what we will be discussing. So this is one of them, where interestingly the prompt was a robot fascinated by a painting in a contemporary art museum. And it somehow got mixed up, right? Because it's not a robot. I mean, the robot is in the painting rather than being fascinated by the painting. So again, you could kind of make fun of that and use it as an excuse to say that that's not worth anything. Or this is a scary looking robot, a scary robot looking at contemporary art in a museum. And again, there's something mixed up. But how it mixes things up is interesting in and by itself, because it also tells you how language can be misunderstandable. So that's one way to also look at these tools, is to see what do they tell us about our world. A robot fascinated by a painting in a contemporary art museum, Saul Steinberg style, I had written here, because these style prompts are so powerful. This is definitely not Saul Steinberg style for those who know him, but it's kind of a striking image. And even these earlier images, which are somehow fails in terms of the prompt, basically it misunderstood the prompt, are kind of appealing images. At least I find them appealing. There's a relationship between this little boy and the robot. And now, the machine didn't know what it was doing. Basically, that's what you mentioned when we started.
Yeah,
But,
I think like one of the aspects that is really interesting is that AI is being able to generate images as such, but has no conception of what space is. It's only referencing a huge library of imagery that has been used to train the model with, that is later on generating these images. But like having overdosed on Kant recently, like Kant says that in order to, like how you recognize things is that you develop some sort of a scheme for it. Like for example, if you want to recognize a dog, then you kind of know it has like 4 legs and it's a bit furry and it moves a certain way through space. But like for an entity that doesn't have any perception what space is, as there is the notion that you need actually a body to get like an intuitive understanding of what space is, there is no way to develop such a schema in the Kantian sense as like that would come naturally to us. So it's like a very, very different way of understanding imagery. And I remember like years ago somebody asked me an image recognition problem, and he noticed that politicians, like when they shake hands, then sometimes through this gesture, they express the relation of power. And he wanted to write a computer program that is able to understand who is the politician that is higher in the hierarchy. And he referred to this as like a simple image recognition program. At the time, I think this is now like has gone a far way. It was even tricky for computer programs to understand whether a cat is an image or not, and simply because the way that a computer program recognizes a cat is by analyzing pixels and by looking at certain qualities of pixels and their neighbors without having any understanding what a cat is.
Yeah, so that would be like the conceptual understanding is lacking in that sense, right? Or what you call the schema, which is
And I think like what I'm echoing here is also the critique of Dreyfus, Hubert Dreyfus, like who critiques like the whole like notions of people who deal with AI that like AI has these powerful ways of understanding. But like the critique of Dreyfus is like developed through phenomenology, and basically what you need in order to understand the world is a body being in the world, and through that you immediately have an understanding of what time is, you immediately have an understanding of what space is. How would you teach an entity that has no understanding of time, no intuitive understanding what time is? That's a tricky task.
Yeah, that's a good point. So that's really focusing on the process of getting to an image, right?
Yeah.
When a human gets to an image, we use all these things that you're explaining. And of course, the way OpenAI gets to an image or Midjourney gets to an image is completely different.
It's very different. And I think like if you, like in this book, I think Gombrich is the name of the author, Art and Illusion.
Yes.
Like he describes how artists draw, and he like one of the points that he's making is that artists use this schema, and like when they draw a church, they draw the mental image of a church, and then they adapt to the churches that are around. But there are little mistakes. Like the schema is always the first thing. And with AI, it's different. It's like fundamentally different. It's like you take like a huge library of images, and with the input, you kind of remix what is there, which is the results are totally amazing. But the point that I'm making is that the how it arrives at getting there is like fundamentally different to how a human being would create a.
And this. Of course, then the question is, what does that imply, right? That would be one question. And Hito Steil, of course, says it implies that these images are not representational, but statistical. So they have no relationship to the world, as she says in this interview, but they have a relationship to all the crap online.
I would 100% subscribe to that idea.
So the field of reference is all the crap online rather than the world. But all these images, of course, have had a relationship to the world at one point, most of them, before AI. So most of them are photographs that someone took of an actual object. So isn't there somehow a trace of the actual thing in the image that is then produced by an AI? Because if it has used a lot of images of trees, and these images were either made by painters who had seen trees, or photographed, then there's something, certainly, a trace that's transmitted, im Sinne von einer Spur, oder, that still is there. So the reference to the world is still there. It's just further away in the chain of causal links, Don't you think so? That was kind of my counter argument to this.
Well, I mean, like you have the human agency in the reference library, and through that, when you train the model, it kind of remixes that.
And one of my students suggested that the same is true of emotions. She said, well, ChatGPT was trained on text written by humans.
Yeah.
So somehow these texts have, traces of emotions. Because if you accept this model, the causal chain leads back to a being with perceptions and emotions, right? So the final producer isn't having any emotions and perceptions, and yet we might argue that there's somehow something emotional about them still. And that's, of course, tricky, and also depends on what's your concept of representation. I mean, another way to criticize this idea of the non-representationality would be to say, well, representation, the best theory of representation is based on recognition. Something represents a tree if most people recognize it as a tree. Then the link to the world doesn't matter at all, right?
Well, I think the question, like an interesting question here is, do you need consciousness in order to represent?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I think, well, there's debates whether, for example, a frog is conscious, but there is something in a frog that can represent a worm. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to stick the tongue out. So I think there are people who argue that for representation you don't need consciousness, but I am suspicious of this idea.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, it's interesting. But what's important when we hear this kind of affirmations, it's non-representational, it's based on all the crap online, is that implicitly there's a theory of representation. And we can agree or disagree, but we should actually try to spell out what's the theory of representation. And then we see that, this is maybe plausible prima facie, but in the end, when you look at theories of representations, there are at least some theories that would say that's not true. These images are exactly representational because, everybody here in the room recognizes two robots, one being on a painting. And so as this recognition occurs, and another theory that could do the job would be the most classical one that's based on resemblance, right? The most classical theory of natural representations or natural signs, as Plato called them, is that they resemble the object. Right, so and this is a theory that's kind of. Yeah.
I think it comes a lot down to the term representing and how you define it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
it comes totally down to that.
There is this classical example of that Hilary Putnam uses. He says like if an ant crawls in the sand and
that's a good point.
it makes the image of Winston Churchill. Then there is the question, does this image represent Winston Churchill, as the creator of this image had no idea who Winston Churchill is? And I think that's a very good analogy.
Interesting analogy.
To what AI is doing.
Because here, look at this image, and with these images that I showed, the question is, so this one is a bit different from the other ones, right? Because you have the feeling that the head is a bit tilted away from the image. So here you don't really have a relationship between the robot that's as strong as in this one. Here you kind of sense this relationship, but the question is if the AI, I would suspect that the AI had no idea of this difference. So here you feel like, okay, they're kind of looking at each other. Here, for us as a human perceiver, it's nearly like I looked at that and then I turned my head and either I'm sad or I'm worried or whatever, I looked at my ancestor who's maybe dead and I can't look anymore, and now I turn away. Of course, these are all my projections, but the mechanism that produced it maybe was like the ant that you mentioned, that has no consciousness of these differences, but just that other images use the schema. So, I mean, I like to think of that in cognitive scripts. Mm-hmm. The script of kind of looking at a painting, that's a script, right? Mm. And so it applied this script to a robot somehow. It had it combined a bunch of images in the so-called latent space, which is this black box where the images get assembled. And one of these was certainly someone looking at a painting, probably not a robot looking at a painting. And one was of a painting, and one was of a robot, and so on and so forth. And then it came up with this image. But this image does something to me as a human, and I hadn't even noticed it at first. Now I noticed it when I looked at it again with you, that there is this slight tilt of the head. And for a human, this tilt is significant. Like if I mean, of the standing robot here, not the one on the image, right? That it seems to be looking this way. And so it's this gesture. And we as humans interpret this gesture, and it makes a big difference from, staring at each other, right? Which is the kind of scheme that suddenly comes in here, where the robot seems to really look at the painting. And yet, this happened in the latent space without the consciousness, but the image produces this effect on me still. And that's where the question becomes, are you a production aesthetics person? Do you think what matters about works is how they were produced? Is it about the work, or are you a reception aesthetics person like Wolfgang Niese, Umberto Eco, and a lot of people in the 60s? And then you could be, well, what we have to look at if we want to find out if these are artworks or relevant works or whatever it is the reception. And so then what I'm talking about is not just my private thoughts, but it's really saying something relevant about the work. When you think that what matters, art is what art does, would be the most succinct formulation of that idea. Art is what art does, taken from Nelson Goodman. And then, the question is, what do these things do? And do they do similar things as artworks? Or you have another theory of art like Levinson, who has a historical theory of art and says something along the lines, things that are intended to be received as artworks were intended to be received in the past. Then one would have to say, well, this tool probably doesn't have any intention of having its things received as art, so they fall short of being art, based on this theory of art. Or you go with the institutional theory of art by Dickens, and you say, well, what's presented in an institution and accepted by the institution, the art world, is art. Then the question is this stuff sold at Christie's, like other artworks? Yes. Is it exhibited in museums? Yes, but maybe there's not enough agreement as of yet to say, okay, it's clear that this is art, right? And is the intention of presenting this of art, can it be a secondary intention? Would be the next question.
Well, and I think there are also like artists like handing in or like applying with artworks they created on mid-journey at art competitions. Yeah. Is this like something that what do we make of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So these are a few questions. There's other questions related to style, and I know that some of you at least are artists. This question of style, how is it with my style? When one of these tools takes my styles and copies it, there's now a big kind of, what do they call it in English, a kind of litigation. There's people who are trying to sue, who are suing Stable AI, who's at the origin of Stable Diffusion, one of these tools, and maybe also suing OpenAI for having used their artworks to feed this latent space in order to then generate images. And there's one artist who is mentioned in the article in the New Yorker magazine that we had put on a reading list, who is often used as a prompt. So people say if you want to kind of generate images that look a bit like from the world of, what is it exactly, from some TV show, then use her as a prompt. So, and then he talks about style, and maybe, we can talk about this a little bit as well if you're interested about the style question. Because this asks, of course, the question of the property of style. Because it's not the individual image, and that's probably the line the defense will take. It's not like this tool is stealing an image. It's taking a style. So can you have ownership of styles? Or is anyone free to use a style? And is it, for me, the next question would be talking about what does it teach us about the real thing, which is the title here, does it teach us that style was never so interesting? Which is what I would like to see as a lesson, because I find style not the most interesting thing about art, far from being it, having a signature style. But of course, that's the way art functions for a lot of people, right? It's like René Magritte is their style, Klimt is his style, Schiele is his style. Birgit Jürgensen, she's not her style, okay? Because she varies her style. She's someone who reinvents herself. Oberhuber, someone famously, fighting against this idea that he had to find a style and then stick to it, right? And so on and so forth. So yeah, that is. We could ask then what it means about styles, but then some artists have found their style or decided their style or whatever term we want to use. I sometimes think that finding your style is a mythology, a little bit like this idea some people would never have been in love if they hadn't heard someone speak about love first, which La Rochefoucauld said. I often have the feeling that a lot of artists would never have found their style if they hadn't been taught that that's what they were supposed to do in art school. And Hitchcock says style is self-plagiarism. So this kind of critical stance towards style as the thing an artist has to find and then stick to. But of course also something the market demands and so on. This is a bit of a hobby horse of mine, this question about style. But here it comes into play, I think. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on this style question?
I think it's a super interesting question, but I'm just started thinking about it.
Yeah. And maybe we can also, Crit Cross is always intended to be participatory. So feel free to chime in and also come with the questions you had based on either these texts, something you wanted to engage with, or now on the onslaught of the conversation or something that made you come here in the first place, right? So apparently it's something that was interesting enough for you to come and check out. What were the questions you brought to the conversation? Maybe yes.
What's the prompt of the Ulrich Obrist?
I have been asked that several times. The prompt for the Obrist. So I don't know if everybody had seen it. I had posted it on my Instagram as well. Maybe I can pull it up so everybody can see it. And a few people had asked me what the prompt was. So I was, of course, as I said, kind of challenged by this Herbert text to see whether really these tools weren't critical ever. And one thing, so I tried to get it to write critical text. And I have a few others which I haven't published, and I even hesitate to publish despite all the experimental and behind which I could hide. But the career of Hans-Ulrich Obrist, Toole wrote, the curator and art historian, has been marked by relentless pursuit of fame and self-promotion rather than a genuine commitment to artistic innovation and creativity. Obrist's work is characterized by a tendency to rely heavily on established artists and their ideas, rather than developing his own original perspectives and insights. Throughout his career, Obrist has demonstrated a disturbing lack of critical engagement with the art world. How do I go to the next image here? Ja, das ist so ein kleiner Pfeil, ne? Peer-reviewed. So this is, as you see, I'm also trying to read some scientific literature on the topic. Throughout his career, Obrist has demonstrated a disturbing lack of critical engagement with the art world and its dominant power structures. His curatorial approach often relies on a superficial engagement with the latest trends and buzzwords, rather than a genuine commitment to exploring new ideas and challenging the status quo. Furthermore, Obrist's obsession with networking and self-promotion has led to a situation where he's more interested in promoting himself and his brand than in promoting the artist he claims to support. His work is characterized by a relentless pursuit of high-profile projects and collaborations rather than a commitment to supporting emerging artists and innovative new approaches to art. In short, Hans-Ulrich Obrist is a careerist who has built his reputation on the back of other people's ideas rather than developing his own original perspectives and insights. His work represents a disturbing trend in the art world where curators and critics are more interested in self-promotion and networking than in promoting artistic innovation and creativity. It is time for the art world to reject this culture of careerism and self-promotion and to embrace a more authentic and genuine approach to curating and criticism.
What was the prompt then?
What was the prompt?
What was the prompt? And I'll tell you the prompt. I had a friend who on Facebook said, "You're lying, you just gave it a text and told it to rewrite it." But what I said was, write a takedown of Hans-Ulrich Obrist showing that he's a careerist who lacks ideas of himself. That was the prompt.
So, because I commented on Instagram.
Yeah.
So if I take other creators' name with the same prompt, it would have the same bias.
That's a good
I
question.
would also put in Klaus Speidel, or me, or
Yeah. Yeah, for some reason it refuses with some people.
Because, like you mentioned before, the program has no idea about the character.
Yeah.
It just scraps data and kind of pattern recognition.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's not
it's
intelligent.
it's pattern recognition. It has no idea what a human being is.
So I took the quote
and-
from the Gibson book, pattern recognition.
Yeah, possibly.
It does know some persons, no?
Yeah.
Like really famous persons who are all over that crap in the internet.
Yeah.
It knows more about than
No, I
others.
think
Well,
it doesn't know.
it doesn't know.
data.
It doesn't know the people. It
No.
knows the names that come up in connection with other things. But I mean, like running in danger of repeating myself. But I think, like, in order to understand language, you need that what like Husserl refers to as the basic basis of knowledge, the Sinn fundament. And this is given to you through your body and through experiencing the world with your body. And if you don't have that, then all meaning collapses.
No, but if you read this, and it makes totally sense to me. So the meaning is there for me, and I don't care if this text, if the entity that created it has meaning or not.
Interest.
In the end, it has been on the prompt of another fellow human being. And I think I came here partly because of this text, because I think it's great text. You know, I don't even know Hans Ulrich who is, but I think that text like this is found so rarely, like it completely.
I mean, I think.
Funny text.
I think.
This is already a lot better than what you would read in most articles.
Well, I think the.
If it's written by a software or a human.
Well, I think.
Or not.
I
Who
think.
cares if it was written by you? I
I
mean,
care.
yeah.
No, but I think.
But in what way, of course, we would have to ask, do you care? But yeah.
But I think that I get suspicious reading those because I understand everything, and usually with art writing, I expect that there is something in there that I don't get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm actually, I don't know why. I'm thinking about, because we've been talking a lot about judging the generated texts or judging the pictures that these artificial intelligence kind of spit out, right? But when we think about it as a tool that we're feeding, I don't think we would blame a camera or a paintbrush if the outcome wasn't the way we expected or we wanted it to be, right? So I think maybe that's, I don't know, I'm asking myself that question as well. Maybe the text isn't bad, or maybe the generated picture isn't bad. Maybe our prompts are not good enough.
Yeah. That's one point I like. I mean, that's one point I would make with a lot when people say, I asked it this and this shitty text came out, look how shitty it is. You know, I'm like, you were not creative enough or you didn't engineer the prompt. Now, prompt engineering, some people say something you will be able to write on your CV if you've played around with these tools long enough, because it will become a skill in and by itself. So that's a point, yeah.
Close enough. I have a question to what you said about the traces of emotions.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the traces of ethics, because I only recently I don't know so much about the programs, but I recently start to try to understand them more. If we talk also about I don't know violence or images of racism, or I'm thinking of what happened also with this case with the Rohingya in Myanmar and Facebook, for example. Where the question is who should have been responsible, or also like in this whole because you mentioned NFTs, this whole crypto mining market, is also the question, shall there be rules in this financial sector as well, or who decides that? Like often the authors and the owners of the platform decide not to have that, or some do, as we see also with Twitter now and so. But what is there? I'm just asking: is there already a discussion or discourse around that, or where are the borders and limits of which kind of ethics are being fed into it, or where do they go really into directions that are also, problematic in terms of, gewaltverherrlichend or other things, or racist or any kind of,
I mean, they have been trying to control that, mainly by having humans read and look at like a bunch of violent images. So there's one article that calls that out, that click workers in at least Nigeria or other African countries had to look at images to teach these tools what was a not good for, whatever they call it, an image that's not allowed. And for the text, the same thing counts. So sometimes it will, when I asked it to write some takedowns, it said, I will not do that. And then for Hans-Ulrich Obrist, it did it without problems. And so for some lesser known characters, it didn't do it. And then in America, there was a polemic because you could ask it to write a critical text on Trump, but when you asked the same thing on Biden, it didn't do it. So all the right-wing people were like, this is biased. So they try to have safeguards in place. But that's the one ethical question, right?
Yeah, and also, like, in whose interest do the safeguards work? Because it depends on who pays them, probably. Yeah, and how good are they? But I also feel there's another question that somehow popped into my mind when you were speaking, which is the responsibility of posting a text, Like, because I can now basically, someone could say, or also has said on my Facebook profile, that they found it somehow, wie sagt man auf Englisch, shy to post a text written by ChatGPT. It's basically, I don't write this about Obrist, but I post it, so my hands are washed in Unschuld, so I'm innocent. But what if a text like this is posted and contains, defamation? Who is there, am I to be blamed for the defamation, right? Could Obrist, if he found that, this text is defamatory, could he try to have a process for defamation or trial? And I'm afraid he's not as interested in the kind of stuff I post on my Instagram as to respond. I mean, it led to a few interesting discussions that you can read through with Johanna Neves, for instance, who's a curator I find more interesting than Obrist, not surprisingly, and who said this is exactly true. And someone had called me out by saying that I was basically attacking my tribe or something. And I was like, I don't feel like I'm part of the same tribe as Hans-Ulrich Obrist, Yeah, exactly. So that a lack of solidarity with meine Zunft or something like that was the formulation. But I don't think my role is to be solidary with... Hans-Ulrich Obrist doesn't need my solidarity. Who needs maybe my solidarity is WHW. It's like, they need my solidarity, but Obrist definitely not. And so I'm going to put my solidarity where I believe it should go and where it's needed, and not to someone who I find ChatGPT rather perceptive in many of the things it says. And I was surprised because I kind of triggered it, but I didn't write the text, And going into this final sentence about the contemporary art world should basically change and become better. There you really get the feeling that it's thinking, but of course it's bullshit that it's thinking. But you get the illusion very easily. And the slip that happened to you happens to us all the time. It knows, we say it knows, but actually knowing is a super complicated human concept that philosophers have disputed since Plato,
But the question
so
is...
does it know? No, it doesn't know, because knowing, implies a whole lot of weight to say that you know something.
But the thing, from the prompt, one would suspect that you didn't want GPT to produce a positive
No,
text.
exactly. Yeah. So I did, of course, I had to tweak it. Yeah. If not, it produces. What I was most struck when I first used it was how, boring and like it was like school, schulmeisterlich. Everything it produced for me was schulmeisterlich. Always very logical, always very nice, and then I found that you have to have a conversation and tweak the prompts, and then eventually does things it wouldn't have done if you had just prompted it at first. But this is something that I think is important and links to what you said, is of course these are, as some people call them, autocorrect on steroids. And we shouldn't call them maybe autocorrect, but prediction things on steroids, when you used to type on your phone and it would predict the next word. And usually these predictions weren't so good, but this does the same thing at a large scale. So these texts are written by predicting the most plausible next word, given a mass of data with which it has been fed. And so I would, and that leads back to one thought you uttered. I mean, this thing that I wrote here, that a good text doesn't put the most probable word next. It puts an unlikely word. That's what makes good writing. And I read a press release recently for an art fair, and it sounded, I was like, wow, this is exactly like ChatGPT writes when you don't prompt it well. Like, all the words are predictable. Every word, the artist engages with the body, You can basically generate these texts nearly automatically. They were written by humans. So that's interesting, because there it also shows us something about a certain type of text. And that's maybe the reason why I find it so likely that these texts will in the future be produced by ChatGPT. Because they already sound like they were written by a machine that predicts the most plausible next word.
But it's kind of like when you talk, like in Industrie, it's kind of Gebrauchsgrafik.
Ja, stimmt. Ja, total. Gebrauchstext, ja, Gebrauchsgrafik. Ja.
There's no personal tone to it.
No.
But
When you have huge data of different authors, but there is lack of something.
But I think like one interesting thing as well is like if you had like a chatbot write a book, for example, would be people interested in reading it? For example, I think it would be very easy to have a chatbot to write a Stephen King book. I mean, Stephen King kind of wrote the same book over and over again. So you kind of train a bot on the style and the topics of Stephen King, and there could be another Stephen King bot generated by AI.
Most writers, or when you read the kind of articles where authors and artists are arguing about ChatGPT or Mind Journey, they say something, okay, that you have the output of text or graphics, but it needs huge correction.
Yeah.
There was this Nick Cave example for a songwriter.
Yeah.
He said,
Yeah.
There is lack of something in machine-produced text or visual.
Yeah,
but-
that's.
but-
I think so.
But the thing is, like, if it would generate a book that I would think, hey, this is quite a good Stephen King book, but like if it would be marketed.
I think it's a more ethical question. How do we value if human does some creative stuff, or if we get presented by machine? I think it's an ethical discussion. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's a moral problem. I mean,
Yeah. How do we value?
even if the text is very good, what if it's not a thief?
Do we care if something comes from a machine and statistical scrap data, or if a human being is doing something? I think it's always a more ethical question.
Yeah, it's. I mean,
Or
that's.
moral question.
I mean, that in your case, it also seems aesthetical, and I like that idea. I mean, because you're saying it doesn't sound
I have a
emotional.
background in media arts,
Yeah.
so-
Yeah. So the question is, do these texts sound a bit unemotional? Because you're kind of making the point that you can feel that the thing doesn't have emotions. Because that's a different question, right? Because you could be a reception aesthetics person, Rezeptionsästhetiker, and still be like, yeah, I don't care that it doesn't have emotions, but I can feel that it doesn't have emotions when I read the text. So there would be a problem with the text rather than the process in and by itself. Because if it writes a text that sounds very good and emotional, then the problem is only what do I think about the process. But if the text is not quite...
When we are on text, like Gebrauchsliteratur,
Yeah.
mass-produced literature, Max Mustermann, maybe that's used for it, but for kind...
Yeah, but do you think?
With a kind of bildungsbürgerlicher background,
But do you think?
value.
Do you think it would be possible to sell, like what you just referred to as mass literature, if you would openly market it as something that has been written by AI, or is
I
there?
don't know. Other people, I don't know.
I mean, people are willing to converse. Yeah?
For sure, some people would buy it just because of that.
I mean, I did buy a children's book written by AI. It's relatively bad, but I think the guy who had prompted it wasn't prompting it super interestingly. But yes, and there is actually some artistic experiments, and I'm currently reading a book. Unfortunately I forgot the name of the author who co-wrote now her second book with ChatGPT, and she always marks the passages written by ChatGPT, and there for the first time I feel a weirdness which I find interesting. Ezra Klein in the current New York Times podcast he does speaks a lot about the weirdness of AI as being something interesting. And in this text I found like some passages where they were uncanny. So it was not just bland and stupid, but it turned into uncanny, you know? And that became really interesting to me. Which this author says only happens in the images, right? And says the texts are bad because they always want to make a point, and in images we like ambiguity, and therefore the images are good.
There is a contribution in the stream.
Yeah.
I just go there and read it.
Tell us, yeah.
There is some passages. Michael Seirer, well, I'm reading now. As long as there are enough websites out there that have content to what you wish it to write, it will do it. Just ask about the Earth being flat. At least on the EU level, there is discussions to regulate AI. Not sure if the US is attempting anything in this direction. And I think this is now concerning what was discussed right now. What is good writing? All words are predictable because the input text was like this. Okay, once in a while, a new author or artist comes along that really does things different, but 99% of us, is it needed to unusual stuff for most of the things we do? And then I think the boils down to, do we need to know if a text was written by a machine? Because in 5 years you can't distinguish them from for sure anymore. Well, yeah.
That's also an ethical question, you know. Should you, when someone sends you an email that's written by AIs, should you have to know? Like when you have a genetic manipulated food where people are...
If there was,
Yeah.
and I cannot know,
Yeah.
I would be happy. This is...
Yeah, to be very honest, when I was starting to play around with this, I have a good friend who out of the blue sent me an SMS saying, if I ever realize that you send me a message written by ChatGPT, our friendship is over. And I was like, wow, okay. And he was like, ich finde das menschenverachtend. I find this dehumanizing. And he is working in a company, you know, placing nurses. And he said, I have a nurse who doesn't like me particularly, and I don't like her particularly. And I'm sure our relationship would be much better if we used these chatbots, and yet I would find it wrong. So it's interesting because you could say, you know, in some cases, and my intuition for this case was like, just have to chat because it's not about your relationship anyway, you know, it's about placing the nurse in a hospital. It doesn't matter, like it's better if it's more frictionless, right? But then with a friend, it's a different story, right? I can understand that when you have the feeling that something was written by someone You want it to be written by that person. And there is one last case that's interesting in this respect is there's apparently a network called Coco, founded by some Harvard graduate, where people can send each other messages unknown. They're kind of part of that network. And if you say, I just lost my mom, then people will send you messages of support by SMS, or they will ask how you're doing, or you're like, I'm currently struggling with depression. And then other people will donate a message to you, and you can reply. And in this tool, they had tested ChatGPT 3. It didn't work so well, but when the 3.5 came out, they tested it again and implemented it in their tool. So people could say, the ChatGPT would pre-write a message. So I would say, okay, I'm going to write to this guy who lost his mom, and then ChatGPT will suggest a message. And you could say, send as such, edit, or discard. And a lot of people decided to send it, and the outcome was that the messages co-written with ChatGPT were appreciated more by the recipient. But they decided to take it out of the tool again, because they felt that there was a value in someone taking the time to write the message. Even if the message was a bit more clumsy or didn't feel as good as a message that would have been written by ChatGPT. And it's also interesting, the pure value of taking the time to do something. And in what relationships we value the fact that someone took the time, you know? Whether or not the outcome is as nice and as likable.
Well,
The gesture, exactly, yeah.
But is that what we value in art?
Pardon me?
Is that what we value in art, though? Someone putting in the time to create something. I mean, some artworks don't really need time to be produced, right?
Yeah.
So, is that something we value in art? I don't think so.
No, I mean, Jean-Claude Levenstein writes about that and says the worker, he's a Marxist art writer from France, he says the worker always at least values the time. You know, when they go to a museum and they see a work that's like basically a contemporary artwork with a lot of pieces, that was kind of his thing. But of course, it's considered a position that's not an informed art judgment because, yeah, as you say, some works don't demand a whole lot of work, or they demand a lot of thinking but little time for execution. Or so we're open to all of this, yeah.
But briefly back to normative aspects. I think like if you want to apply, like judge if this is a good thing, if you just care about the consequences, then thumbs up, I'd say.
Yeah. Okay, so that's yeah.
I mean, like, it's just like which ethical framework do you want to use?
Or maybe it's case-based, you know? I would say, okay, for work conversations, it's more okay. It's probably gradual, because a lot of work conversations turn into semi-personal conversations and so on and so forth. I mean, it's blurry, right? But like writing to a friend, like having my messages to a friend written by ChatGPT, I would find more problematic than writing a job application to a person I don't know with ChatGPT, no? But I'm questioning, yeah, I'm not a radical, because that's what you're getting at, right? Because I said it's only about the output.
No, but like, I think some things are really tricky to write. And let's say you fell out with somebody and you try to save the friendship or the relationship.
Yeah.
And ChatGPT could save it,
Yeah.
find the right words,
Yeah.
something that you don't have, the ability.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I've been in that situation. And okay, that's kind of a disclosure. I won't tell you all the details, but I had to write a difficult email to a family member, and I was like, okay, like how do I say this? You know, I want to refuse an offer which is well meant, but which I don't want to accept. And so I asked ChatGPT to I put in the basic ideas, and ChatGPT said things which I was like, that's something I feel, but I wouldn't have said to this other person, because our style of communicating doesn't involve that. Like imagine you have a certain style. I mean, there's an artwork, to make it abstract a little bit again, there's an artwork that we're going to include in an exhibition we're now curating at the Dom Museum around death. And it's a work by Renate Bertelmann where she kisses her mom on her forehead, and it says, "Da Mutter, das habe ich mein Leben lang nicht gewagt." Okay, so there are apparently a lot of intimate relationships where certain things are not possible, or where certain things are not said, where there's love, but this love is not expressed, and so on and so forth. Now, ChatGPT kind of, was like, well, you don't want the thing, but you love the person, so tell the person, like it was like, I love you very much, and I really value this offer, and your generosity, and so on. And I was like, yes, it's true. I value the generosity of this person. I wouldn't have said it, but then I decided to include it. And it was interesting because it kind of blurred, things for me. Because it allowed me to express something I wouldn't have expressed otherwise. And that made it complicated for me. Yeah?
Interesting. So it was like a really good therapist, basically.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. Mm.
But all of these situations existed before, like you could have had a ghostwriter.
Yeah.
So text is from the eye or from someone else who doesn't know your family member and just is expressing your feelings better than you are. There's the big difference.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, but from the software, it's not the expression of feelings.
No.
It's the interpretation of what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
I feel like it doesn't matter, but
Because, of course, I mean, it's true that, it's the question, is the problem that you pass on the role, that you externalize, right? Because with a ghostwriter, you are externalizing emotional work, for lack of, it's an ugly term. But in a way, if we stay with externalization, then we have to call it work, and it's paid. So you're externalizing some emotional work, and now you can externalize it to a machine. And then the question is that a gradual difference? You would say maybe it's a gradual difference, or is that a category difference? Because you're already externalizing. It's not the problem that you're externalizing it, if there's a problem, independently of whether you're externalizing it to a machine. The problem is that someone else writes your heartfelt letter and doesn't have these feelings that you're expressing in the letter in your own name, right? So that's the ghostwriter example. Does it matter that now it's a machine that does it?
And who is on other levels, who is in the ownership of the algorithm?
Yeah.
It's also a big topic. Because
Yeah.
it has a certain bias, like social media.
Yeah.
But
Put
it's
something new, you're kind of American ground.
yeah, but like one issue raised in the articles as well. It's not the algorithm, but it's the samples the algorithm has been trained with, and there is definitely ownership in those. And so if the algorithm does like a remix of those, then somewhere there is a problem. Yeah.
I mean, for instance, I was looking for that, but I couldn't find it. When you go on Midjourney or on Blue Willow, these tools, they are on Discord, and then you see what everybody else generates, which is interesting in and by itself, because you realize that most people are using it to generate what we call in German Wix-Vorlagen. So basically naked girls that correspond to their fantasy, or they can't be quite naked, so they always put a bikini on them and so on. But one thing I saw is someone was looking for a drug dealer, and it only output black men, of course. So talking about biases, right? And when you look for CEO, it only gives you the output of white males, And so, of course, it perpetuates a certain way of seeing the world and solidifies possibly this worldview, because the number of texts and images that's being generated is much greater than the number that could be generated humanly. And talking about the ethics question and what was mentioned in the chat online, indeed, the EU realized that a lot of, AIs are now producing comments on articles, and that Russia and China, which are perceived officially by the EU as hostile forces that are meddling and that are producing disinformation massively, are now already using all these tools to produce more of these misinformation or disinformation. Misinformation would be unintentionally wrong, but disinformation is intentionally wrong information. yeah, so there's a bunch of problems that's hiding in all that, right? Politically as well, and for future elections, because there won't even be a person writing the Facebook post anymore. So how can you flood, with a certain point of view? And you probably, maybe some of you saw this Georges scandal, this Israeli company that runs a ton of profiles on Twitter and profiles that seem real and are not, and they can basically sway the conversation in a country by doing that, using AI. So there's a lot of things that will be hitting us also, I think, badly and hard, let alone the voice imitation tools, where you can now take a snippet of 10 seconds and then the tool can generate your voice. So someone can call your grandma and speak with your voice and say, hey, I've been kidnapped, or whatever. So people who work on that are already starting to have code words with their loved ones that only they know, so that in a case they can ask for the code word, even with a specific accent. So if someone finds the code word, they still don't know the accent. So there's a lot of problematic uses that will become possible, but concern us less with the question of art, I suppose. Yeah, a part of this ethics conversation, of course. And in a way more ethically problematic, even though I love the art world, than whether someone imitates my style on Midjourney. I mean, I think this is the least problem we will have, that someone will generate something in the style of. Yeah. Other thoughts or contributions?
Can there be made,
yeah.
Can there be made, or is it too simple to make a kind of analogy in terms of is this with the development of language, spoken language, that there are influences that some people might criticize, nevertheless language is always continue to develop in an uncontrollable way somehow. And then also, of course, the more and more we read these texts, as you say, we might sometimes not know whether they are AI driven. They also really influence our taste, our style, our ability to analyze or rationalize or whatever. So they also really also our kind of our intelligence develops with it. Or our perception, visual perception is we re-educate ourselves through that maybe. Is it a too simple analogy, or is it a too simple analogy? or is, I don't know, question for everyone. And then maybe you could have
I think the question that I asked when you asked this is, so the question I ask myself is, what is new to this? All of this is already being done by people. So it might just take it on a next level in terms of quantity, but yeah, we are all influenced by everything around us already,
I think it touches on a really interesting question. It's how does something new come about? As a neural network can do permutations of already existing stuff.
As can we.
Can we do something more? I mean, that's...
No. I mean, we are part of the world. We are limited by the world, I guess. I mean, my
yeah,
turn,
but the thing is, we are limited by the world, and a neural network doesn't know the world. It only knows the input that we give it.
But I found quite interesting actually in the first versions, there's, for example, DALL-E Mini. It has I think that the training data is quite limited. So all the glitches that appeared. So this I found actually new and quite interesting. The same was a bit when I had with DALL-E images, where I could kind of see that the machine doesn't understand that this is a three-dimensional object. So it kind of merges parts, or we know it with the hands, like one of the robots also, he had like 6 fingers. So I think this part is quite interesting and quite new. So where there's actually something new or image-wise, just from the construction of the image or composition.
Yeah, I agree as well. So the glitches are kind of what it brings in. I mean, when I'm looking at other people's stuff, very often I find images where I'm like, that's not the image the person wanted, but it's actually more interesting what the person wanted. This was, for instance, a person asking for a man cleaning a vase with a brush. And it generates these absurd objects where the brush becomes the thing that is being cleaned. I mean, you can basically go through all these different things, and you'll see different ways of failing to understand this prompt in a human way. These ones, I kind of like followed up on them a little bit. Or this one with the multiple arms. This was someone just wanting some soldier in some uniform shooting a gun. But I liked actually the triple arms somehow. I don't know what they tell, but for me it did something about that image. And so these glitches, I mean, here are other versions where he's cleaning the brush instead of cleaning the vase, and the tool understood I need a vase, but the brush is being cleaned instead of the vase. And here he has 3, he has like hands randomly flying around in the air, and here he's cleaning the vase like we clean a toilet. So like somehow the latent space image didn't quite fit, and so there are these effects that I find really interesting, and I wonder whether they teach us something about our language and what we presuppose, and about the ambiguity that could be there. But for us, it doesn't make sense that he's cleaning a brush with the brush. So we don't even. And these were other ones where I was trying to get it to tell a story, which it's really bad at. But this was a story around. I was interested in Hogarth and these images of infidelity and traces and so on. So I asked about a man surprising his wife with a lover or something like that. And then one of the images generated was that. And it's kind of, an interesting images of jealousy or something, like trying to be in the other person's head and like being totally übergriffig and pervasive. And there's even some René Magritte which kind of work on that. But it generated it unintentionally, and you're like, we shouldn't appreciate this. So.
No, I'm just thinking it generated something new. I think like looking at this closer, it totally contradicts what I just said.
So you would say that it does generate, and the leg of the guy is like basically replacing the leg of the chair here and so on. So it does generate these kind of weird things.
Would you like to say something?
Someone?
Yeah, I have another just on the same topic where I thought, what was I think the prompt was something, the artist's paradise, and then as a style oil painting, and the image was an oil painting, but the depiction, like the background and the painting, like became blurry, so it was more the painting in a painting, and the paradise was the painting itself. So I found that like those errors that they actually gave me a new, it was quite inspiring of what an image could be and how those glitches could actually generate a meaning that I would never have thought before, but that were quite productive. Just accidentally maybe, I assume.
Yeah.
I don't know how it comes
Probably
in.
the intentionality of getting these mistakes as valuable, it's still ours. So that it's still like something unintentional. Oh God. It's something unintentional, so it's kind of random, but the value that we give at that randomness is ours. So it's still the human in the end, always, no? The right. Yeah, but maybe I am.
It's their property, like, how do you say that? They own the rights. Like, it wasn't clear before, but nowadays they own it. Like, I cannot use the image that I created with my prompt.
Okay.
At least for that, it's the case. But I find it quite interesting because, like, it needed my prompt for the image, and still I
Yeah. No, yeah, please.
No, I also think that it's a combination of a lot of things that were just said. I mean, when you say that the human is giving it value, and also you're saying that the outcome, the product basically is like you don't own it. But at the same time, we are the ones deciding, are we using it as it is? Are we, like when it's a text, like are we just using this exact one or are we revising? And I feel like with ownership, you can definitely use the images that are being produced and modify them in a way that you want them to look in the end. So then the authorship, when we talk about authorship, isn't with DALL-E anymore, it's now with you, right? So it's almost like, I don't know, when we talk about the simplest reference, when we talk about Warhol, right? This whole thing of using something that is owned by someone or something else and making something of your own. So I feel like, I don't know, these things are like coming to my mind all the time, thinking about this. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, thank you.
There is another contribution.
Yes, maybe if it's not on this point, I would say just one sentence about intention. Because of course, it's the question of intention that you're bringing in, I think is important. And there is this thing that Paul Valéry said, that a great artist is necessarily a first-rate critic, not necessarily of others' works, but of his own. And it's used in a text by Monroe Beardsley that's called On the Creation of Art, where Monroe Beardsley says the image that Arnheim gives, or at least he attributes it to Arnheim, that art creation is goal-directed throughout is wrong, and that actually the artist sometimes finds solutions they hadn't been looking for. So again, with Jari Genzo, I could say it's already been there as well, right? Before, when you did something and then you discovered something else than what you wanted to do. So we have already accepted, that there's chance happenings and that you as an artist can then somehow make that your own by your decision. So the intention doesn't necessarily sit on every level of the artistic creation. It can sit in the prompt and then again in the choice. And in between there's something else. It's like when I do a dripping and then like I choose among my 500 drippings, I choose one, right? So there is something in between. And this in between maybe could become, an AI, at least that's a way to kind of save intentionality and artistic creation within this world where we may use these tools.
Just a short note. So that's a possible solution. Use AI as a start to get us humans creative. Smiley.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, for brainstorming, I think it's a very good tool. And I do know also that some advertisement agencies will not employ as many interns as last year because the interns did jobs that the AI can now do, which was basically brainstorm ideas. So there's something, so it already has an impact right now. And it's true. And sometimes, I mean, this one I found also good was also someone else who had prompted it. And it said, man welcoming death like an old friend. So, of course, the image we have in our mind is two people. And Blue Willow being a kind of stuttering AI, so it might be like your early, open DALL-E Mini right now. It produced this thing where the friend and death are basically the same person, or I don't know. Or the man and death. And it's very... So it's a misunderstanding, but it's kind of, we feel like it's a productive misunderstanding here that we can work with. And this is someone, Pamela Anderson, as my secretary behind the desk in a bikini. Or more exactly, it was a Pamela Anderson as if Pamela Anderson is this thing rather than a person. Hey, Pamela Anderson, behind as my secretary, what's the info for the tool? It's very funny because you kind of also get a sense of who's the person behind the screen when you see this. So I always sometimes enjoy just watching what people generate because you get a glimpse into their minds somehow and a feeling of, so that's, Pamela Anderson as his or her secretary behind the desk in a bikini. Okay, so this is actually, I would think this would be a very nice art project to do a kind of sociology of the uses of these tools. So not just their outputs, but looking at what are they used for and what images do people keep. Because we go, of course, for being trained in a certain way, and I think having a lot of us a similar interest go for something that most people would discard, but it's kind of interesting what is also kept and discarded by non-art folk, who now have a tool to make images. Well, go ahead if you have another.
I'm still interested. Like, how many people of you have dabbled with DALL-E?
Or Midjourney, or Blue Willow, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5, 5. Okay, yeah.
And was there something that was created that you could use in your own creative process, assuming some of you do art?
I mean, in my case, definitely. As part of my PhD at the Angewandte, before that I used a lot of regression meditation and a lot of just internal, through meditation and through like hypnosis and all of that, I generated narratives and images in my mind that I then had to, in some form or shape, externalize, right? Or just find an output for that. And at some point, they got quite repetitive. So what I started doing now was...
Sounds like art.
Excuse me? Very artsy, yes. No, but what I now, like, what I just like started experimenting with was outsourcing the meditation aspect of it. So it's not completely like gone, but I kind of think of my ancestry, like that's the whole like PhD thesis, blah, 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 blah. But so I kind of generate word clouds in my mind and then put these word clouds into DALL-E. And I've been generating just thousands and thousands of photos. It looks like photos of like ancient sculptures and very aesthetically into a certain direction that I keep like tweaking to get a more precise image of what I thought of. And now I've started to just get really just abstract with it and let it be abstract as well, because before that I really wanted to have that one certain thing coming out. And I feel like now the AI has trained me to be more open to other possibilities, that I'm not just taking it and placing it at the wall or something. I'm reworking it and like readjusting and all of that. But I've been using it for like about 2 months now. And to me, it's definitely enriching in my practice. Because I don't believe in just like going with a certain style. My thing changes all the time, depending on what I'm working on. And what I'm working on right now, this tool is really helpful for me in generating imagery.
But
I can. No, I don't want it. Thank you. What you're saying is resonating a lot with me because I also work on my diploma project now. I'm one as well, and I'm working on experimental animation movie, dealing with the loss of my father when I was 13, and this interaction, this where you have to put into words, because the only tool like your paintbrush are just words and language, and you have to be very precise what you wanted to give you. And I was working a lot with memories and like trying to remember scenes and worlds and like places we visited together. And I have to say that this was very surprising for me at a certain point where I was trying to describe meticulously what I was remembering, that the image I was getting back was then like re-triggering different memories I already had forgotten. So in that sense, I find like, I really found a kind of therapeutic co-creational process in this, because I would have never thought that this inanimate entity could give me some kind of healing, right? But it was like really, I started remembering things I would not have remembered in a way, by seeing these visual imagery that AI has created. So in that way.
And would you guys be happy, like if I would compare the process, like if somebody paints an oil painting and starts with certain elements, and then they're looking at these elements, and then suddenly this person figures out like, okay, this must be, the rest of the painting must be like that, but it's just like because of a process that started, and how he started the painting informs like how he comes to an end by like a permanent observing what is this similar, but just at another level that you guys are doing.
I think the difference for me personally, I can only speak for myself, is that you don't have a direct output to what you're giving it. Because when I paint, it's me who does the painting, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm involved in putting the color on the canvas, but this is like a different, I don't know, because I give it something and I don't know what I get back. And I can't compare it to, I mean, I see what you're getting at and where you're coming from, but I wouldn't say that this feels the same as painting.
To me, it's really interesting because I don't paint, I don't sculpt, I don't like reproduce. I'm just yelling now. I don't really like generate. I collage a lot, right? Digitally and with different like media and materials. So for me, the aspect of like painting would be a way bigger hurdle to create something that I want, like I have already set in my mind, or to create something that's inspiring to me or like triggering another way of going about. So to me, it's definitely a tool that helps me visualize what I'm thinking about a lot or what I'm theorizing. So to me, it's definitely a tool that's like sparking triggers and sparking kind of inspirational bombs or something that I then can work on or like incorporate into other different things. So I think your analogy I think makes sense in that way. But thinking about painting, to me, that would do like nothing.
And the final result that you produce is produced entirely by AI entity?
No.
No. So you modify it afterwards?
Yeah.
Because like the interesting question would be, like one interesting question would be that if at the end of your creative process, the image would be entirely produced by AI, is it art?
I mean, with found objects, right?
It's the same. You can like find a piece of gum on the street and take it up, and before that it wasn't art, and now you give it some kind of sense or give it some kind of. You don't think so?
No, I think found objects is like are found objects, but like with like an image creating algorithm, you kind of tap into the works of a lot of other people. So
I think it's all about contextualization. Everything can be a work of art if it's contextualized, and I mean, to me at least.
Yeah,
That's how I see it.
Following up on that conversation, of course, it kind of asks the question where the art sits, and when we have the feeling that, I don't know if you had that feeling, but when sometimes people speak about this, it's like the art sits in the image, and that's not, I think, a very contemporary conception of art anymore, or at least it's not my conception. And that was also the problem with NFTs, you know. It was about what the image looks like. And that's just one for, like, I think for people who've gone through, you know, modern and contemporary art, what an image looks like is just one part of where the art sits. And so, I mean, I wrote exactly one text about NFTs where I said a good NFT is an NFT that's about NFTs, not an NFT that just makes an image that's pointless, was pointless for me. But so you could say, in a way, there needs to be more, not just a picture, right? And so what that more is, there are many possibilities, but for me it's not enough to have. And yeah, so that's a bit the analogy, and I do see the analogy with the found object or with the, but you're also right that it's not the same. I mean, it's what's interesting also in your experiences, and also corresponds a bit to mine, is there's a gap between the wording and the image. And this gap is based on the media. So this is really a media question, because words, of course, if I say, and that was the case here, a robot fascinated by a painting in a contemporary art museum, there's so many things that remain open that now this tool needs to fill in. And one thing that was, of course, for me a tremendously interesting choice was that it filled in the painting not with a Géricault or Delacroix or even a Magritte, or I don't know, a Tracy Emin, but with a fucking robot. So basic, and it seemed...
That's a picture of a robot.
Exactly.
Who's looking at a painting.
Yeah.
It's
exactly, but it feels...
It's a picture, it doesn't exist in a room, it's a sculpture, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true, but...
It's a concept of a robot standing in a room looking at a picture.
Definitely. Yeah. But what I want to get at is that I said a painting, right? And the way it made the painting was it seems to make sense here. It seems to make tremendously sense. What's a painting that a robot would be fascinated by? Not a Delacroix, Liberté guidant le peuple, not things that we humans care about, but maybe a painting of a robot, you know? So it filled in this indeterminate term, painting, by making it a painting of a robot, which weirdly looks like a painting from the Middle Ages or from the 19th century. So it's kind of like a robot ancestor or something. I mean, it becomes weirdly smart, but I don't know if this smartness is purely ours as we look at it. I suspect that it's ours. But in any case, what it does, it fills in this gap. And then the way it fills in this gap does something with us. And suddenly I was really sitting in front of this image and another one which I found seeming similarly good for a very long time, because this one, you know, my partner said it looks like a kind of ape. So like an ancestor robot, you know, it feels like it's looking at its ancestor, which of course doesn't make sense because the ape is just the ancestor of the human. But so it seems really on point in a weirdly precise way, which is probably chance. But in any case, then I started thinking about this whole thing of ancestry and robot ancestry, and it triggered a whole thought process, which was based on the fact that in the beginning my prompt was, you know, open, because words are more open, all other things being equal than images.
But that could also come very close to what you said, like the stereotype of the drug dealer or the CEO.
Yeah.
Paintings are that a stereotype of looking at paintings is looking at something in the past or something that tells a story about ourselves. Say?
To look at old masters.
Old masters, exactly.
Yeah.
Or as you say, the ancestors of the robots, like apes, and so like I connected very strongly like to our own. Yeah, it tells us about our own stereotypes, probably.
Yeah.
Also that exist in some some ways.
Totally. It also put a.
So we could use it as a tool for self-reflection if we're really smart.
Yeah. So that's it's an interesting aspect, and it kind of, saying that you can use it for brainstorming is only saying so much. Now we're getting much more deep into what exactly, you talking about, like approximating a mental image. I mean, it probably gives you a certain understanding of mental images. And you talking about new memories, triggering memories, it's another way you can use it. So I find it really interesting to try and start to cartograph, kind of figure out what are all these uses that we can put it to, speaking truer to what we feel than we speak ourselves, in my case of this letter. So there's a lot of kind of weird things that are utterly no one would say that's what's going to happen. So these are things you can only find out by doing it. And that, it would get closer, that something that has no emotions would be able to express my emotions better than me having emotions. I mean, that's like utterly unpredictable. I felt that was an utterly unpredictable outcome. Even when you ask the tool itself what makes a difference from humans, it will repeat, I don't have emotions, I don't have perceptions. So it will always bring up these limitations. And of course, these are the aspects where it's the least interesting, because I have the feeling that, of course, there's much less text existing about differences between humans and ChatGPT than on, say, politics or painting that it could be fed with. So it always falls back on the same schemata. I think the basis it draws on for certain questions is so much smaller that then it becomes quickly repetitive. Whereas when you ask it about things that have been around for a while and that a lot of people have been writing about in different ways, it's richer. So that's also, in terms of what the latent space contains, it's also an interesting thing one can observe.
I found it actually the same as the guy in the text describes with the images. If you take a prompt that includes the topic and the style kind of resonate well. I don't really remember what the example was, but for example, I asked, and I feel that for the text it's the same, like ChatGPT, that I had this example of Novalis asking him about what is please write me a poem about the identity crisis of an artist. So of course Novalis as a romantic, what did he write? And I don't know what the strokes are, and it's like the crisis will be not in any economic surrounding, but it will be in the image itself, or creating the image. When I ask him, okay, please write the poem in a way that it's not in the image but in the economic surrounding, it was not a good poem. Before it was quite well, and I had the feeling that also in this slide, that the same procedure that is described in the text regarding the images can be quite helpful in ChatGPT, with text. Mm-hmm. So that the style of the text is kind of in relation to the content you want to produce.
Mm-hmm. So when we're talking more closely about the New Yorker text, right, where the author says that, basically, one thing he realizes, and the article is titled, what AI can teach us about the real thing. And he says one thing we learn about the real thing is that style is not just form, it's also a certain content. And you would say that something similar appears as well in the writing. Yeah, that's possible. Uh-huh.
So if it's a personal letter, and it will be better able to also include those feelings than if it's a different combination.
Yeah,
so to say.
That's probably true.
I wonder, what do you think? Would you regard those artificial intelligence created pictures differently if they were made by humans? Because
I didn't understand.
no, I mean all of those pictures we saw from Midjourney now. I can feel your enthusiasm about what the AI did or did not or misunderstood or whatever. But if I thought that they were made by human, they are all pretty conventional and not really interesting pictures, no?
That's an interesting question, yeah.
Is now what I was thinking, but you always knew where they came from.
Yeah, that's...
Did you ever ask yourself if you didn't?
It's a very good point. Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's what most people also say about them. I mean, that's also what Steidel says about them. Says they're like, they look like crap, or they're not interesting, and their style is shit, and so on and so forth. So she really talks about that. Yeah, so I actually mobilized the context. I'm not talking about the image per se. You're totally right. I mean, implicitly, I talk about what was the prompt, what is the relationship between the prompt and the image. I'm not so much, this is a great image. I mean, I think they're efficient. Some of them are efficient images, but maybe not great images and definitely not great artworks. You know, I would make this difference between an efficient image and a great image, which would have to be more complex and have a certain richness and, yeah.
But still, maybe the controversial problem, I'm sorry to be the conservative one, it's that probably it can be thought as a machine that uses imagination on our behalf. And so the controversial ethical problem could be, should you say that you used that machine helping you imagine on your behalf? So it comes into my mind the example of DeepL, when I translate something with DeepL, and at the end there's like, translated with DeepL, and I always delete that, but it's kind of cheating. Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, it's
I don't know.
It's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, or because I agree with what you say, or I had the same thought, like when I saw the images with the vase, and so they were really curious, or they caught my curiosity because I knew they were AI generated. But coming back to this example also that you talked about the messages that are being written to these people who pay for it, and then the AI written ones get better reviews, or or not better reviews, better reviews.
Yeah, they get better. People like them more. Yeah.
Or people like them more. I think it touches again on this question also, what is taste? What is a taste or style, like an average taste or average style in a certain culture in a certain part on this planet, or so I think it teaches us about these things at the end of the day, like, because
So it generates insights on what is kind of the dominant dominant ways of making pictures in a way, right?
I wonder, because I could imagine that I mean, I know that you're an artist, so and I can relate somehow to your understanding of that. I know a little bit about your history or your style as well, and I could imagine that some people, if they would not know whether they're AI created or not, would really like those images or would hang them on in a big poster in their bedroom, you know. And so that's the...
Yeah, I mean, that's true. One question that brings up is also, of course, we are an audience, and we want to be this audience of very or relatively sophisticated, you know, art people. And I don't want to, I'm glad that we didn't talk too much about that, but it might be that for a lot of people, these are good enough. Like that for probably 99% of the people, these are good enough. And this is also an interesting reality to take into account.
And sorry, to interrupt the last thing. And also, this is the problem that teachers in schools are facing right now, how to motivate children to, on the one hand, use but not use, or how to break expectations. Maybe that's a good thought of, because the students are asking, okay, what for am I writing my homework if the AI can do that? And it's also important, like for that generation, probably to learn to deal with those things. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's no coincidence that OpenAI has run the largest experiment in unconditional universal income. One of the major companies doing that has run, and that stability.ai reserves stock for the people it will put out of a job. So they know that the world that's coming will be probably massively different and massively disrupted. And I just became a father a few weeks ago. That was one of my Instagram posts here. And today I was like thinking about this and holding my daughter, and I was wondering, you know, how it will be when she's growing up for her, and why would you still want to learn? I mean, how many people define themselves through their job right now? And how many of these jobs will be taken away by AI? A lot of jobs in finance, a lot of qualified jobs, illustrator jobs. I think, unfortunately, I mean, illustrators are protesting this, but I think it's inevitable that a lot of illustrators will lose their jobs, because when you can pay $20 a subscription to have an image, you'll think twice whether you're going to pay $2,000 for an illustrator. And then the question really becomes, okay, and then why would you still study, right? And I think it will become an existential. I mean, I think there are a lot of effects that will be triggered by this development that we don't foresee yet, and one of these will be, what do we do now? Why will we still study? Will we still study? And what will we study?
Develop yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Then maybe.
Sit and talk, and you have your own opinion, and my own opinion, you can talk.
Yeah, so maybe that will become, and maybe it will be in that sense, it could be, some people would say that's a better world, you know. But maybe we will just be producing more stuff and just becoming all prompt engineers, and expectations will go up, and like they always have in a way, and the pressure for output will become higher, because people who don't use AI, I think it will become fallacic in the future to do any research without asking one of these tools. Like today, it would be absurd or fallacic to not type it into Google, you know. I think like we're not far from a world where like you can't start a research, you won't be serious if you haven't asked one of these tools before. It's going to be like a Taschenrechner for calculus and so on. And yeah, and what does it do? Yeah, but maybe that for self-development could be one thing. And I'm honestly, you know, one kind of, and then I found it too pathetic, you know, sitting with my baby, but I have nunchakus. When I was a kid, I used to play with nunchucks, you know, these things that Bruce Lee has. And I have like these foam nunchucks, and they were lying on the table. And I had this thought of bringing the nunchucks here and starting to talk with the nunchucks, human imagination, and then saying, I'm working on my nunchuck skill because I'm afraid that's going to be the only skill that, you know, will maybe be valuable that I have in the future. Because the intellectual skills that I have prided myself in having will not have any value anymore. I mean, that's kind of the world that a lot of people foresee now. In the past, we always saw that we thought that the blue-collar work would go, just the factory work, and now it looks like actually the work that was safe, counted safe, still 5 years ago, which is the white-collar work, the knowledge workers, that they are the creatives, that this is the work that will go first. And then maybe what remains is like massaging, because some people will feel more comfortable being massaged by a human than being massaged by a robot, even though on absolute terms, the robot will still, you know, be better in hitting the spot. But you will just be like, but I like hands on my skin or something. And maybe even that in 40 years, you will be awkward for liking hands on your skin. And most people will be like, I have my robot that does it. Yeah, so that's a bit my future scenario. But of course, this is a less theoretical and less conceptual and more factual predictions, which might be wrong and maybe hopefully wrong, or not hopefully, because if we don't have time to dedicate to our self-development rather than having to learn a job for earning money.
Like, just one thought, like connecting to what you just said, like you raised the question, like if people like what ChatGPT writes, like the responses more than the ones that human wrote, what does it tell about us? I think that if you think of these exchanges a bit like a game that can be successful, you could think of ChatGPT being something like a chess computer, like something that produces like very successful responses in this gaming situation, just as it is the compiles the like from everything it heard. But I think what it can't do is to extend the game.
Yeah, and perhaps that's the question, right?
Yeah.
For me, that's a question. If it can't, I mean, that's what we are hoping for right now. Like when we think about what we can save for humans. Yeah.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to go back to the question regarding education or self-development and relate it to Neuralink, the brain-machine interface scenario. And I think the question would be interesting to ask how we would perceive education or self-development as a kind of brain-machine, in this brain-machine symbiosis. Because this would, I think, change the game even further.
So the idea, like this Neuralink, of course, for those who know, is like the idea that you can just think and the machine does stuff. So you
have an interface.
Don't need a mouse.
Exactly, you have an interface in your brain which connects to the AI systems. So you don't need any physical interface anymore, but you can, with your thoughts, activate or ask questions or delve into certain environments of knowledge or creativity. So I think this is a very crucial question to ask.
Yeah, it's for some people that's the utopia, right? We are kind
or
of
dystopia, I don't know.
Yeah, we're kind of like illumination through connecting the human brain to the illuminated machine. So, yeah, and to each other. Yeah. That it's maybe a kind of far or not so far off scenario, but definitely something to ponder. Yeah. Okay, I think we've done 2 hours. I mean, it was thank you everybody for participating. Thank you for jumping or like allowing.
Thanks for the
to
opportunity.
invite you.
Yeah.
Here with me, I felt much less lonely, and it was great to have a counterpart also. Thanks to you who all came. We will have another Crit Cross in June. I hope that some of you will remain faithful, even though it won't be about AI, it will be about feminist criticism. We will have 2 writers, Nina Schädelmeier, who's running a blog called Artemisia, and it's a kind of strong feminist blog calling out the KHM constantly on the exhibitions they do and so on, very interesting. And Rosalind de Mello, who is from India. They will be in conversation with me. She's living in South Tyrol now and is one of the most interesting art writers I know. So I hope that some of you will come back for that, even though we won't be talking about AI then. And maybe some of you want to know what Jari does. He just made a book, and we will be in conversation on Thursday at the Angewandte, human painted, about human painting. So as you hear, I used the opportunity to also announce that, and the question of style definitely plays a role as well in this work. Yeah, so
also big thank you to Depot.
Thank you a lot to Depot also for hosting this again and being our most faithful partner for our Crit Cross since the beginning. Yeah, and not only. Yeah, for what?
We have always our panel discussion with art critics.
The panel discussions with art critics as well. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Good. Yeah, and Jelena Kalujerovic, who joined us a bit late, who's one of my partners in crime in Verein K, and Dejan Kalujerovic, who's the other co-founder of Verein K. Yeah, I don't know if the bar stays open a bit. Or?
Oh yes.
Okay, good. So
Absolutely.
the bar stays open for those who need a glass of wine to continue the conversation. I'll stick around a bit, and I hope. Will you stick around? Yes.
Yeah, and thanks a lot also for those guys who use art and like AI in the creative processes. It was really interesting to hear how it's done.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, good. The session is ended. Thank you.